The morning light crept through the narrow windows of Eleanor Wright's flat in Camden. The city outside was awake, restless as ever, yet something about it felt hollow. Eleanor stirred her tea with a slow rhythm, watching the steam rise and fade into nothing. The flat was quiet. Too quiet. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, a single message glowing on the screen. It was a reminder from her calendar. Breakfast with Oliver, Grace, and Theo. 9 a.m. at the old cafe near King's Cross. She smiled faintly, almost forgetting she had made those plans. The cafe was their spot. Worn-out wooden tables, the smell of roasted beans and wet coats, and the laughter that always echoed louder than the rain. When she arrived, the cafe looked exactly the same. The old clock on the wall still ticked unevenly. The smell of cinnamon still lingered. But the table by the window, their table, was empty. 3 untouched cups sat there, faint wisps of steam curling upward as if waiting for someone. Eleanor glanced around. No sign of them. Not a single familiar face. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, looked at her with a puzzled expression. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said after a pause. "I'm just waiting for my friends." He hesitated, then spoke again. "You come here alone every week. Are you sure someone's joining you?" Her stomach tightened. Alone? That couldn't be right. She looked at the 3 cups again, at the empty chairs across from her. Their voices were still clear in her head, Oliver's teasing tone, Grace's laughter, Theo's quiet hum when he was lost in thought. But none of them were here. Not a trace. Not even their names written in the reservation book. Eleanor left the cafe an hour later, walking briskly through the drizzle, her mind racing. She checked her phone again. The messages she remembered sending were gone. Her group chat, erased. It was as if it had never existed. That night, as the rain fell harder, she sat by the window of her flat, staring at the reflection of the city lights on the wet glass. Her reflection stared back, tired and uncertain. For the first time, she whispered their names aloud, just to make sure they were real. Oliver. Grace. Theo. But as she said them, the names felt thinner, as if they were slipping from her memory like smoke from a dying candle. And somewhere deep inside, Eleanor began to wonder if she had already started forgetting something she was never meant to forget. The next morning brought no comfort. The gray sky hung low over London, and the soft drizzle blurred the view of the street below Eleanor's window. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cafe, the empty chairs, the untouched cups, and the way the barista had looked at her with quiet pity. Her first thought was simple denial. Perhaps it had been a mix-up, or she had dreamt the message. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers trembled as she typed their names into the search bar. Oliver Reed. Grace Bennett. Theo Clark. No results. Not on social media, not on university records, not even in her email history. It was as though they had never existed. She leaned back in her chair, heart thudding in her chest. Eleanor decided to go to campus. Maybe someone would remember them. She walked through the familiar streets of Bloomsbury, past the bookshops and the rows of Georgian houses, their bricks darkened by the rain. The university courtyard buzzed with students rushing to lectures. Yet as she scanned the faces, there was no sign of recognition, no hint of the friends she had shared years of memories with. In the art studio, Professor Langdon greeted her with his usual tired smile. "Morning, Eleanor. You look pale. Everything all right? Do you remember Oliver? Grace? Theo? They're in my course," she asked quickly. The professor frowned. "I don't believe I've taught anyone by those names." She tried again. They were in the same exhibition group last term. They helped build the light installation. But the professor only shook his head. "You must be mistaken. You worked alone on that project." The words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with charcoal portraits. There they were, 3 figures drawn in her messy, expressive style. She had captured Oliver's confident posture, Grace's bright eyes, Theo's quiet smile. But when she showed them to the professor, he saw only smudged outlines and incomplete faces. "Eleanor," he said gently, These sketches are beautiful, but they're blank. She blinked. The figures were fading before her eyes, like watercolor washing off the page. That evening, she returned to her flat and tore through her belongings, searching for proof, photographs, notes, anything. In the end, she found one thing: a small Polaroid wedged between two books on her shelf. It showed 4 people sitting together at a cafe table. Her smile looked wide, genuine. But the 3 figures beside her were nothing but faint shadows, outlines without detail. She sat on the floor, Polaroid in hand, her pulse loud in her ears. Somewhere, the city hummed with life. Buses rumbled down the streets, horns echoed across bridges. Laughter rose from the pubs, but Eleanor felt utterly alone. She whispered again into the silence, "Oliver, Grace, Theo." And from somewhere deep inside the flat, she heard a soft sound, a creak, like a floorboard shifting under invisible weight. Then another, slow, deliberate. She turned her head towards the dark corridor leading to her bedroom. The sound stopped, and that was when she noticed something written on the wall in faint pencil strokes. Words that hadn't been there before. Stop remembering them. Rain fell through the night and into the early hours, tapping against Eleanor's window like fingers too afraid to knock. She sat on the floor until dawn, staring at the faint writing on her wall. The words "stop remembering them" seemed to shift when she blinked, as if the letters themselves were alive. By morning, she needed answers. Across the street stood an old townhouse, its paint peeling and ivy curling around the windows. Eleanor often noticed the curtains twitch there when she came home late. She had never thought much of it before, but that morning, something in her gut told her the place was watching her. She threw on her coat and crossed the street. The pavement was slick and shining, puddles reflecting the pale light of the London sky. At the gate, she hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim hallway lined with dusty portraits. "Hello," she called softly. No answer. The smell of damp air and old paper filled her nose as she stepped inside. The house felt abandoned, yet there were signs of someone's presence. Half-burned candles on the mantelpiece, a kettle still warm on the stove, books stacked carelessly across the floor. Then she saw it. On the 3rd morning, she made a decision. The man in the townhouse had spoken as if he knew what was happening. If she wanted to survive, she needed to find him again. But when she returned to the house across the street, it was gone. Not empty. Gone. Where it once stood was an empty plot, fenced off, as though the building had been demolished years ago. Only a patch of uneven pavement remained, glistening with rain. Eleanor felt the cold press of fear move through her chest. She turned to a woman walking her dog nearby. "Excuse me," she said, voice unsteady. "The house that was here, what happened to it?" The woman frowned. "There's not been a house there for years, love. Got knocked down before the pandemic." "You feeling all right?" Eleanor forced a nod, then walked away quickly, her breath visible in the damp air. Her reflection in a shop window looked pale and distant, almost unfamiliar. She spent the day wandering the city, searching for something she couldn't name. When she reached St. Paul's Cathedral, the bells were ringing, soft echoes rising into the overcast sky. Tourists moved around her, taking photos, their laughter echoing against the ancient stone. She moved through them like a ghost. Inside, the cathedral was vast and quiet. The golden light filtering through the dome cast shifting patterns on the marble floor. She climbed the winding staircase to the whispering gallery, her footsteps echoing softly. When she reached the top, she leaned against the cold railing and looked down at the empty space below. The silence seemed to hold its breath. Then she heard it, a faint voice, carried on the curve of the dome. "Eleanor." She froze. The whisper came again, from somewhere across the gallery. "Do not look for them." Her heart pounded. She scanned the circle, but no one else was there. She pressed her ear against the wall, and more whispers flowed through, faint and fragmented. "You were chosen. They are gone because of you. Forget, or you will follow." Eleanor staggered back, clutching her chest. "Who are you?" she whispered, but the sound was swallowed by the air. Then, from the far side of the gallery, she caught a glimpse of movement. a figure standing in the shadows, still and silent. She took a hesitant step forward, but the figure melted away, leaving only the echo of her own heartbeat. As she descended the stairs, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message. No number. No name. Just 5 words glowing on the screen. They remember you, Eleanor Wright. Outside, thunder rumbled over the city. She looked up at the sky, her reflection trembling in a puddle by her feet. For the first time, she wondered if she was the one disappearing, if London itself was starting to forget her. And somewhere above the storm, faintly, she thought she heard her own voice whispering back through the rain. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. London seemed trapped beneath a gray veil, the streets glistening like glass and the air thick with silence. Eleanor sat at her desk, the dim glow of her lamp flickering across the Polaroid she could no longer bring herself to touch. The faint shapes beside her were now almost visible, like faces half emerging through fog. She needed proof. Something she could hold, something that would tell her she wasn't losing her mind. Digging through an old box beneath her bed, she found a dusty envelope marked with the logo of a photo printing shop in Shoreditch. She couldn't remember ever developing film there, yet her name was written on the back in neat handwriting. Inside were 6 photographs, each one stranger than the last. The first showed a familiar street corner near Camden. The second, the cafe by King's Cross. The third made her chest tighten. It was the inside of her flat, taken from behind her sofa. She dropped it, pulse racing. The next 3 photographs were worse. One showed the townhouse that no longer existed, standing tall and untouched. The 5th showed the man she had met there, his pale face half turned towards the camera. And the last photograph showed her, standing in the rain, looking up as if someone had called her name. The timestamp in the corner read tomorrow, 9:15 a.m. She stared at it for a long moment, her breathing shallow. How could there be a photograph of her taken in the future?
Sleep was impossible that night.
Every sound felt magnified. The creak of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tapping on the window that might have been rain, or might not. When the first light of dawn slipped between the curtains, Eleanor dressed and left her flat. She walked to the spot shown in the photograph, an intersection near Camden Lock, where the canal ran quietly behind a row of brick buildings. Her watch read 9:10. She waited. At 9:15 exactly, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, stopping just out of sight. Her breath caught. She turned. No one. But on the ground where she had been standing was another Polaroid, still warm from development. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It showed her standing in the same place, just seconds ago. But this time, there was someone else in the picture, standing right behind her. The man from the townhouse. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared without a sender. You can't change what's already happened. Eleanor looked up, heart racing. The street was empty, the city silent except for the gentle murmur of rain. But something in the reflection of the shop window caught her eye. Behind her, for just a heartbeat, 3 figures stood in the mist, Oliver, Grace, and Theo, watching her with eyes that no longer seemed human. When she turned, they were gone. And on the glass where their reflections had been, she saw the faint outline of new words appearing, written in condensation. We remember you too. By morning, the city felt colder. The mist clung low over the Thames, swallowing the skyline until even the glass towers seemed to fade. Eleanor walked through it like a shadow, the damp air curling against her coat. Her mind returned again and again to the Polaroid, its impossible timestamp, the faces behind her, the words written in the fog. She couldn't go home. The flat no longer felt safe. Every reflection, every whisper seemed to carry the echo of her friends' voices. So she went where she always used to go when she needed to think. The library beneath the British Museum. It was nearly empty that morning. The scent of paper and dust hung in the air, and the dim lamps gave the place an amber glow. Eleanor descended the marble stairs to the restricted archives, her steps careful and slow. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she knew how to slip past unnoticed. The security guard at the front had long since stopped questioning her visits. Among the stacks, She searched for records, old student directories, archived newspapers, anything that might prove Oliver, Grace, or Theo had existed. But each time she found their names, the ink seemed to blur, the words dissolving as she read them. At the far end of the aisle, she found something strange, a folder marked with her own name. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, attendance forms, medical records, even an old passport photo. But every detail was wrong. Her name was there, her face too. Yet the address listed wasn't hers. The dates didn't match her memory. And in one of the photographs, she stood beside 3 blank silhouettes. A faint rustle broke the silence. Someone else was down there. She froze, listening. A whisper carried across the shelves, low and steady. "You're not supposed to be here." Her pulse quickened. She turned slowly, expecting to see the man from the townhouse. Instead, she saw an elderly librarian standing in the half-light, his face pale and drawn. "I'm looking for my friends," Eleanor said quietly. The man shook his head. "You shouldn't look. They're not gone. They've just been moved." "Moved," she echoed. He gestured for her to follow. His steps led her deeper into the archives, where the shelves grew narrower and the lights dimmer. The air was thick with age, heavy with the smell of damp stone. At the end of the corridor was a locked door. The librarian produced an old brass key and turned it slowly. Beyond it lay a small chamber lit by a single bulb. On the walls were photographs pinned in neat rows, hundreds of faces, all half-faded. Some were smiling, some mid-speech, all slowly vanishing into nothing. She stepped closer, eyes wide. Near the center of the wall, she saw them. Oliver,
Grace, Theo.
their faces blurred but still recognizable. Her voice trembled. "What is this place?" The librarian's expression was grave. "This is where memories go when they are erased. London remembers everything, Eleanor. It simply chooses who gets to stay." He turned towards her. "If you want them back, you'll have to give something in return." The bulb above them flickered once, then twice. When the light steadied, the librarian was gone. And on the wall where her friends' photographs hung, there was now a 4th picture. Her own face, looking back at her. Eleanor stumbled backwards, her breath caught in her throat. Her photograph on the wall looked freshly printed, the edges still curling slightly from the heat of development. The more she stared, the more it felt as if her own eyes in the picture were staring back. She reached out to touch it. The surface of the photo was cold, slick with condensation. And as her fingertips brushed the image, she felt a pulse, like the faint rhythm of a heartbeat beneath the paper. A sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind the shelves. She turned sharply, her heart hammering, but saw nothing. Only rows of old boxes and the weak light flickering against the stone floor. Then a voice, soft and measured. "You shouldn't have looked at the wall." She spun around. The man from the townhouse stood at the entrance of the chamber, his expression unreadable. In the pale light, his skin seemed almost translucent, as though he didn't entirely belong to the world around him. "What is happening to me?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the wall of photographs. "Do you know what London is built on?" he said quietly. "Not just stone, not just stories, but memories. The city keeps them. It feeds on them. And sometimes, it takes back what it's given." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't understand." "You were supposed to forget," he said. "When they disappeared, you should have let them go. But you remembered. That made you visible to the city again. Now it wants to balance what you've broken." Balance. He turned to face her fully, his gaze steady. For them to return, something else must fade. The words hit her like ice. "You mean me?" He said nothing. She backed away, shaking her head. There has to be another way. But as she stepped back, she caught sight of her photograph again. The edges had darkened. Her face in the picture was fading, the features blurring like smoke. The man watched her closely. "The process has already begun." She turned to run, pushing past him and out into the corridor. The sound of her footsteps echoed up the stairwell as she fled the library. When she burst into the street, the daylight felt too bright, the noise of traffic distant, muffled, wrong. People walked past her without looking. She called out to one, a woman carrying shopping bags, but the woman didn't react. Eleanor tried again, louder. Still nothing. She reached out, brushed the woman's arm, and her hand went straight through. A cold shock ran through her. Her body was still there. She could see it, but to the world around her, she was no longer solid. She turned toward a shop window. Her reflection looked back at her, paler than ever. But she wasn't alone. Standing just behind her reflection was the man from the townhouse. His expression was calm, almost mournful. "You're halfway gone," his voice whispered through the glass. "You have one chance left to choose." And in that moment, the reflection of London behind her seemed to ripple, as if the city itself were breathing. Eleanor took a step closer to the glass, her voice trembling. "Choose what?" The reflection of the man leaned forward. "Who stays and who disappears?" The streetlights flickered. The world went quiet. And when the lights came back, her reflection was gone. The rain had turned to mist again, soft and relentless, curling around the rooftops of the city. Eleanor walked through the narrow backstreets of Clerkenwell, following the faint trail of whispers that only she could hear. They weren't words exactly, more like echoes of memory, fragments of laughter, the sound of her friends calling her name through layers of time. The man's voice still lingered in her mind. Who stays and who disappears? She didn't know where she was going until she reached a small shop at the end of the lane. The sign above the door read W. Ashcombe, clockmaker, the letters worn and gold. Through the window, she could see hundreds of clocks. Old, intricate things, all ticking slightly out of sync. Inside, the air smelled of metal and oil. The sound was hypnotic, 1,000 tiny gears whispering at once. Behind the counter stood an old man in a waistcoat, his spectacles resting on the end of his nose. He looked up when she entered. "You're late," he said. Eleanor froze. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," the clockmaker replied, his voice calm. "But you will." He motioned for her to follow him down a narrow staircase behind the counter. The air grew cooler as they descended, the sound of ticking fading until only one deep, rhythmic beat remained, a great clock buried beneath the city. The basement was filled with gears the size of tables, their surfaces etched with strange symbols. In the center of the room stood a clock unlike any she had ever seen. Its face was made of glass, and behind it, instead of numbers, were fragments of moving images, streets, people, memories. "This is the heart of it," the clockmaker said softly. "The city's memory. Everything that has ever been forgotten ends up here." Eleanor stepped closer, watching as faces drifted across the glass, Grace smiling in the cafe, Oliver sketching in the park, Theo humming under his breath as he painted. The images shimmered like reflections in water. "Can I bring them back?" she whispered. The clockmaker studied her with something like pity. "To bring them back, time must take something in return. The city cannot hold more memories than it was given. For every life restored, one must fade completely." Her throat tightened. "And if I refuse? Then you will vanish with them. Slowly, silently, until not even your own shadow remembers you." Eleanor stared at the glass clock, her reflection ghostly against the moving scenes. The second hand ticked once, and she saw something change. Her reflection looked older, thinner, the color draining from her eyes. She pressed her hand against the glass. "Take me instead. Let them go free." The clockmaker hesitated, then shook his head. "It isn't for me to decide. The city chooses. It always chooses." The gears behind the clock began to turn faster, the rhythm deepening. The glass rippled like water, and a soft light spilled across the room. "Eleanor," a voice whispered from within the clock. It was Grace's voice. "We didn't mean for you to follow." Tears blurred her vision. "Please," she said. "I just want to see you again." The clockmaker stepped back, his expression grave. "Then step through before it decides otherwise." Eleanor took a breath, heart pounding. The glass of the clock shimmered like a mirror caught in sunlight. And when she reached out, her hand passed through. The world around her dissolved into light and echoing time. Light surrounded her, soft, golden, endless. Eleanor floated in a space that felt both vast and close, as if London itself had been turned inside out. The hum of the city was there, distant but alive, woven into the rhythm of her heartbeat. She looked down and saw no ground, only faint outlines of streets and rooftops suspended in the light beneath her feet. Then she heard them. Oliver's voice first, quiet and uncertain. "Ellie?" She turned sharply. They were there, Oliver, Grace, and Theo, standing just a few steps away, their faces flickering between solid and transparent. They looked exactly as she remembered, and yet not quite real, like reflections caught in moving water. She ran to them, tears stinging her eyes. "You're alive, I thought." Grace shook her head gently. "We're not alive, Eleanor. Not anymore. We were taken when we tried to remember something we shouldn't have." Theo stepped forward, his expression soft. "The city doesn't like when people hold on to what's meant to be forgotten. It collects us, keeps us here. In between." Eleanor's voice trembled. "In between what?" Oliver answered. "Between seconds. Between heartbeats. Between one memory and the next. A place that doesn't exist, except for those the city no longer wants." The words settled like frost in her chest. She glanced around, and the light began to shift, flickering between brightness and shadow. In one direction, she saw glimpses of the real world, the streets of Camden, the cafe, the canal. In the other, only darkness, deep and silent. Grace reached for her hand. "You shouldn't have come. It's already chosen you." Eleanor shook her head.
No.
"The clockmaker said I could give something back. A trade." Theo looked at her with sorrow. "A trade always comes with a price." Before she could answer, the space around them began to pulse. The air trembled, and the sound of ticking filled the void, deep and resonant. The glass clock appeared above them, its hands spinning wildly backward. The man from the townhouse stepped out of the light. His eyes were calm, but his voice carried weight. "It's time." Eleanor turned to him.
Please.
"Let them go. Take me instead." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You still don't understand what the city wants." He raised his hand, and the light around her began to bend, pulling at her edges like wind tugging at smoke. She could feel herself thinning, her body losing its shape. Grace cried out, trying to reach her, but her hand passed straight through Eleanor's arm. Oliver's voice broke, shouting her name. The man spoke again, quietly. "The city remembers balance. If you take their place, their memories will return to the world, but yours will not." Eleanor's voice was faint. "That's enough." The man gave a small nod, almost respectful. "Then remember this moment if you can." He turned the clock's hand once more. The light fractured. The world began to unravel. She felt a sudden stillness, a breath between seconds. And then nothing. For a heartbeat, the city above paused. The rain stopped falling. The wind held its breath. And when time began again, London carried on as though nothing had changed. The morning light crept softly through the windows of the old cafe near King's Cross. The smell of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries drifted through the air as the barista wiped down the counter, humming quietly to himself. Outside, buses rumbled by, and people hurried through puddles left by the night's rain. At the table by the window sat three friends: Oliver, Grace, and Theo. They were laughing, softly at first, then louder, as if nothing in the world had ever come between them. Grace sipped her tea and smiled. "It feels strange," she said. "Like we haven't been here in ages." Theo nodded. "Feels like coming back from a long dream." Oliver leaned back, grinning. "Maybe we finally remembered what matters." They all laughed again, though none of them could quite say why. On the table, 3 cups sat steaming. The 4th chair was empty. Outside, London was alive. Trains in the distance, the hum of the city constant, steady, endless. But every now and then, the three of them would fall quiet, glancing toward the empty seat as though expecting someone to arrive. "Do you ever feel like," Grace began, then stopped, frowning. "Like we're missing something?" Oliver looked at her, brow furrowed. "Missing what?" "I don't know," she said softly. "It's just a feeling." Theo reached into his bag, searching for his sketchbook. When he opened it, a photograph slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Grace bent to pick it up. It was old, a little blurred. 4 figures sitting together at this very table. 3 of them were clear. The 4th was faded, only a shadow where a face should be. Grace frowned.
Who's this?
Oliver leaned in, squinting. "Strange. I don't remember taking that." Theo tilted his head. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light." They laughed it off, though the laughter didn't last long. Grace placed the photo on the table, beside the empty cup. She stared at it for a while, tracing the faint outline of the missing person. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and rhythmic. Drops ran down the window, blurring the view of the city beyond. In the reflection of the glass, for just a moment, there was a 4th figure sitting with them, watching quietly, smiling faintly. The bell above the cafe door rang as a new customer entered, shaking the rain from their coat. But when the barista looked up, the seat by the window was empty again. Only 4 cups remained. One still warm, steam curling softly into the air before fading into nothing. And as the clock above the counter ticked from 1 second to the next, the faint sound of a woman's voice seemed to echo through the cafe. "Thank you for remembering me." The city outside carried on, indifferent and eternal, its stories hidden in the spaces between seconds. And somewhere, in the rhythm of the rain, London whispered her name once more.